When we come here, what are we actually choosing? And how is choosing to be Unitarian Universalist different from simply being one? What's the difference between showing up and being present and intentionally choosing what that means? In this moment in time, a time that I believe future historians will not reflect on gently, what are we called to do and to be? And how will we help one another through it? Author Jane McGonigal writes, "Urgent optimism is a balanced feeling. It's recognizing that yes, there are great challenges and risks ahead, while also staying realistically hopeful that you have something to contribute to how we solve those challenges and face those risks. Urgent optimism means you're not staying awake all night worrying about what might happen. Instead, you are leaping out of bed in the morning with a fire in your pants to do something about it. Urgent optimism is knowing that you have agency and the ability to use your unique talents, skills, and life experiences to create the world you want to live in." Jane McGonigal is many things, but her primary titles are futurist and game designer. She's the only known expert who holds PhDs in both fields. She's also the author of the incredibly practical and urgently optimistic book whose original title that I prefer is Imaginable: How to See the Future Coming and Feel Ready for Anything, Even Things That Seem Impossible Today. Urgent optimism is knowing that you have agency and the ability to use your unique talents, skills, and life experiences to create the world you want to live in. If you were able to attend the Friday evening event of the CUC Collab in November, it was an online Zoom event that we held, you will know how passionate I am about Jane's work. I've got her book with me if you want to take a look or take a picture afterwards. And its great value in our Unitarian Universalist context. Her book, Imaginable, is being used by wise beings around the world to interrupt the patterns of doing the same things over and over, harder and harder, and hoping for a different outcome. I first learned about it at a United Church Flourishing event that was led by their moderator, the Right Reverend Dr. Cameron Lansdowne, and I was hooked. I've since learned that other UU colleagues are using it with their congregations across the continent to great effect. If you have one takeaway today, I hope that it will be that Jane McGonigal's book, Imaginable, is a treasure full of ideas and exercises that invite and even push us to imagine the world through transformed eyes and to take practical actions to make it so. She invites us to train and flex our imagination muscles because we have to be able to imagine something if we're going to enact it. And her work is hopeful, but not unreasonable or ridiculous. So here's more from Jane. Imagination is the first act of pulling the future into the present. It builds urgency, motivation, and a community for action when we share our imagination with others. Questioning also pulls the future into the present. Every question we ask makes space for new ideas and new possibilities. And when we frame future possibilities as questions instead of predictions, we can be braver and bolder in our thinking. We don't have to be certain, we can be curious. We can reveal our curiosities to others. We can start asking the same questions together. So let's keep going. What other futures can we imagine? What other futures should we imagine? Are you ready to defy linear time? Are you ready to start pulling? Jane McGonigal. Now, Unitarian Universalists, we are good with questions. It's kind of what we do. We question everything. I wonder what would happen if, as we dare to imagine a thriving future together, as we ask questions about what that might look like and how we could nurture that vision into being, I wonder what would happen if we used our mad skills around questioning intentionally to be curious together, to defy the predictions, and to use our powers to pull us tightly together to help create a different future. I want to tell you a little story about imagining. It begins at a CUC staff meeting. We're a small team. We meet on Zoom weekly because we're spread across the country, and our executive director, Vida Ng, was telling us a story about the Avalon Fund. Have you heard of the Avalon Fund? Yeah, me either. When the Avalon Fellowship in Newfoundland closed some years ago, they gathered their assets and invested them in a trust, the Avalon Fund, to be held for the future for a time when there was a UU presence in Newfoundland once again. And at the moment, Vida was telling us that this trust was feeling less like an opportunity and more like a burden, because the CUC had been holding this money for years and nothing had bubbled up to speak to it. I'm guessing also nobody knew it was there. It is next to unbreakable, this trust. So even though the donor, the person who built it, has said, we'd like to broaden the parameters, if there isn't a project rising up here in Newfoundland, let's make it useful in another part of Canada, it would actually require a legal fight. It's a solid trust. So while it had grown into a substantial amount, it had nowhere to go. And Vida was sharing this problem with us, but something else was happening in the room. Lights were coming on in people's eyes. You could tell that some of the staff team was instantly dreaming of, what could I do with a few $100,000 UU dollars? Especially our younger staff. I'm pretty sure they were already launching endeavors in their minds. Have you ever played the If I Had $1 Million game? Right? Where you imagine if you won a lottery or $1 million just landed in your lap, what would you do with it? Of course, it's not worth as much today as maybe the last time I thought about that, but still, I take games like this very seriously. I get deeply invested, and I start out kind of wild. What wild thing would I do that I just can't imagine doing now? Because there's no constraints and there's no pre-existing rules or conditions. So I think about ridiculous things. And then I think about, how do I want to feel? That's my values question. I'm a feeler. And so how could this windfall help me to get there? I want to feel ethical. I want to feel generous and compassionate. And you get it. I want to live into all of my UU values and principles. And with a sudden boost like a financial windfall, it's easier to imagine creative ways to do it. You know when you're on a Zoom meeting and you can tell that the people are half listening, half Googling? I'd lay money that most of the staff was Googling Newfoundland. Because we were given simple prompts: a fund of money, a UU presence, and a location. That was it. There weren't a lot of limitations or details. None of us live in Newfoundland, and so it's easier to be creative when you're imagining something that's outside of your everyday reality. We were imagining a bunch of different things. Congregation, of course, comes up first, obviously. But it could be a social service project. It could be launching a network of small group ministries or home churches that starts in Newfoundland and spreads across the Maritimes. It could be partnering with someone on an existing initiative that could use an infusion of energy and optimism and a respectful dose of Unitarian Universalism. We were all remembering we weren't going to colonially come in and tell Newfoundland what to do. Mostly. So free from constraints and with a bunch of metaphorical money in hand and no tight guidelines, our imagination soared. I'm a UU. I like making things. What would I do? What would you do? Imaginations are just waiting to take flight. And what was, in some ways, a vexing problem, in other ways, can be a launch pad. When I shared this story with my wife, Lori, she lit up just the same way we did, sparkly eyes. And the next question was, did it even matter if we had that kind of money? It would be nice, but it isn't actually necessary to inspire dreaming. And the reality is, somebody has that kind of money. Somebody always has that kind of money, and if a dream is compelling and shared, it will catch the imagination of others. I'm going to share one more story, and then I'm going to invite you to sit with your own imagination for a few moments. In January, I visited some of my BC congregations, which meant that I also got to spend a few nights with family between meetings and services. So I got to have deeper conversations with my brother and my sister-in-law, way deeper than our usual one dinner a year together, if we're lucky. And I'm embarrassed to tell you what I learned. These lovely people had come to my ordination in 2009. And I talk about ministry and work all the time. And they had no idea what a UU is. They had no idea that I don't personally identify as Christian. I'm Christian friendly. My roots are there. I identify as a Unitarian Universalist. They just heard minister, and a story filled their head. Now, these are not unintelligent or simple people, and they had no idea what a UU is. And in large measure, that's on me. So they asked me, how do people find out about you? How do they know what you are? It was a very good set of questions. So we're going to take a couple of minutes for reflection. Your musician will play softly in the background for us, and when we're done, I will come back with a quick story and some closing thoughts. I invite you to let your constraints down. You don't have to be practical or realistic. Here are some suggestions for you to choose from. You could imagine this community 10 years from now. What would you like to find here? Or you could imagine, if it's a better fit, imagine, say you had $300,000 for a Newfoundland project. Or maybe you're harboring a secret dream for Unitarian Universalism in Canada. Feel free to sit with that. And if all of these things are too big or too far out, you could sit with, what's one small thing I'd like to help change here? Or rest. If you could use a rest, just rest. Carter taught Sunday school every week from World War II until COVID. That's 75 years. Every Sunday, he led a class and he'd look out into the room, often filled with strangers. People from around the world come to hear what this man had to say. He would speak of his week, what was going on in the world, what moved him, what mattered. And he made sense of it all through the lens of his evangelical faith. His family, his friends, even his political opponents said that he was the same person at home as he was at work, as he was in the Oval Office, as he was out in the world. His values were deeply rooted, strongly held, and represented in every move he made. During his funeral this January, and if you haven't heard it, I encourage you to find the video on YouTube. It is a deeply moving ritual. I think it was his grandson said that Carter was deeply influenced by a sermon he had heard as a young man where the minister asked, "If you were arrested for being Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you?" Now, I prefer the other definition of convicted, like she was a woman of deep conviction. But either way, it works. Conviction can be heroic, like being on the front lines of a cause, or quiet, like supporting a community in small ways. It can be as simple as literally sharing your faith with someone. How had I missed sharing my faith with my beloved family? Bonus points, it wasn't too late. But let's go back to Carter's inspiration and give it a little tweak. If you were arrested for being a UU, would there be enough evidence to convict you? What would that even be? How would you measure? If I'm a person of deep UU conviction, and I am, how do people know? What do they know? It's not always about sharing who UUs are. It's equally valid to simply be good and kind and just. To be caring and inclusive, to be curious, creative, and joyful in my faith, to never give up on who we truly are, even in those times when all we can simply do is breathe. Our world is in an ever-heightening tension as democracy and collaboration are put to the test. On February 11th, Pope Francis wrote to his U.S. Catholic bishops, including this excerpt that resonates so well with our understanding of the world. And while I'm not entirely aligned with his work, I feel inspired by this expression of courage and even daring, and more than ever, it's critical that we figure out how to work together for good. The letter referenced the mass deportations in the US, and the Pope wrote to his bishops, "Likewise, Jesus Christ, loving everyone with a universal love, educates us in the permanent recognition of the dignity of every human being without exception." And he goes on to say, all the Christian faithful, that's some of us, and people of goodwill, that's all of us, are called upon to consider the legitimacy of norms and public policies in the light of the dignity of the person and his or her, and I would say also their, fundamental rights, not vice versa. We cannot define the value or dignity of a person based on norms and public policies, but rather, policy should be defined by the dignity of every human being. We are called to be brave enough to resist what opposes our values. I'd go so far as to reason that the Pope was encouraging civil disobedience. And to resist what is harmful is to activate our urgent optimism. In these times where the very notions of democracy and sovereignty are feeling fragile and tariffs looming is just one kind of impending threat, where their uncertainty and anger are so often the leading emotions, this is when our gifts of connection and community and curiosity and our ability to find calm are so essential and sustaining. This is when it is important to remember that we can still get excited. We have something truly precious here with one another. And what we do really matters. We have the ability and the collective resources to imagine a better path and to share that path with others. When we work together, we can help one another not be overwhelmed by the mounting anxieties. To help each other to know that there is a place for each of us to belong, where there is kindness and honesty and hope. We can be a house of love, respecting the inherent dignity of all. May it always be so. Blessed be. Now, I'd invite you to rise in spirit or in body and sing with me. And one of my favorite treats of traveling is that I get to hear the Finlandia music every time because I ask for it. We're going to sing number 159, This Is My Song.